This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Walking a diplomatic tightrope in Washington, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi sidestepping President Trump's pressure over military support in the Middle East while reinforcing the US-Japan alliance. Meantime, China is urging restraint and unimpeded oil flows through the Persian Gulf as fresh Israel-Iran strikes raise fears over global energy supplies. And a slight pullback in oil on hopes that the conflict may end sooner than expected, but prices remain near highs as the Strait of Hormuz stays effectively shut and Iran continues missile strikes across the Gulf. The Philippines says a Chinese warship locked fire control radar onto one of its vessels in the South China Sea, a move Manila calls alarming as the system is used to guide missiles. And China's anti-graft purge widens. Chongqing's mayor Hu Henghua is under investigation in Beijing's latest high-level corruption crackdown. The South Korean officials pledge full safety preparations ahead of K-pop megastars BTS's comeback concert in Seoul tomorrow. Terror alert in the area has been raised, with thousands of police deployed to the capital. The war in Iran casting a shadow over the meeting between Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and US President Donald Trump in Washington. Well, the US leader has been pressing American allies for help in its conflict in the Middle East, with Mr. Trump earlier urging Japan to answer his call for support.
I expect Japan to step up because, we have that kind of relationship, and we step up for Japan. We have 45,000 soldiers in Japan. We spend a lot of money on Japan, and we've had that kind of a relationship. So I'm not surprised that they would step up.
Ms. Takaichi also seeking to bolster Tokyo's position with Washington after sidestepping a joke the U.S. leader made about the Second World War Pearl Harbor attacks, comparing it to the surprise American strikes against Tehran.
そうしまして経済安全保障で安全保障など、幅広い分野におきまして、同盟の質を、さらに高める、多くの具体的な協力を、確認することができました。今後もですね、トランプ大統領とともに日米同盟のさらなる高みを目指してまいります。
For more, let's bring in CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. Michio, tell us more about the outcomes to the meeting and how was it received domestically at home in Japan?
Well, Japanese political watchers think Prime Minister Takaichi handled the meeting with President Trump fairly well. Despite her concerns earlier, he might say one thing and different comments later. Now, this was the case when he called on countries, among them Japan, to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, as it's in their interest procuring much of their oil through there. Then, at another time, he said he did not need those countries. Well, Ms. Takaichi said she explained in detail to Mr. Trump what Japan can do and cannot do. The self-defense force cannot be sent to an area in the middle of a conflict and far from Japan. And after the war ends, the self-defense force can contribute. There is no indication yet whether Mr. Trump was happy or unhappy with the explanation. Now, for the benefit of both countries, they formed an action plan to secure a supply chain for critical minerals. And they also agreed to cooperate on procuring the possibility of deep-sea mineral resources in Minami Torishima, which is a remote Japanese island. And here are comments from the general public on their assessment of the outcomes.
どんな会談になるか、その内容には非常に注目していたんですが、高市首相には日本法律の範囲内でできることということをドナルド・トランプ大統領にきちんと伝えていただけたようなので、その点は安心しています。
すごく評価はしてて、トランプさんの機嫌も損ねず日本としてはいい立場を ちゃんと確保できるような立ち回りをしてくれたのかなと客観。
Well, after this weekend, we might get a better idea of what the general public thinks about the outcomes of the talks between Ms. Takaichi and Mr. Trump, as public opinion polls by media are expected to be released.
Right, and Michio, energy concerns obviously front and center amid the Middle East conflict. How did the Prime Minister respond to those concerns?
Well, Ms. Takaichi said the conflict in the Middle East must be calmed down as soon as possible to secure safe navigation through the Straits of Hormuz. But as an alternative, she proposed to boost the production of crude oil in Alaska. And that crude oil can be stored in Japan and for the rest of Asia. Now, energy security was the top agenda in the second batch of projects under Japan's $550 billion investment in the United States, which was agreed last July. Ms. Takaichi raised the importance of construction of small modular reactors as demand for energy rises worldwide, and given the situation in the Middle East. And natural gas generator facility construction was also included in the second batch of projects.
Michio, I mean, this summit is not just about the Middle East, but also in focus, regional security in East Asia. What do we know is being discussed about that?
Yes, well, Ms. Takaichi told Japanese media that she discussed China and North Korea with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump told her he understood the edgy relations Japan had with China. Now, as you know, relations soured after Ms. Takaichi commented on a possible Taiwan contingency as a survival-threatening situation for Japan. And Beijing demanded her to retract that statement. She did not. Ms. Takaichi told Mr. Trump she was open to hold dialogue with Beijing. Now, Mr. Trump assured her he will be speaking for her with the Chinese President Xi Jinping during his trip, which has been postponed from late March by a month and a half. They also discussed North Korea. Mr. Trump supported the repatriation of Japanese abducted to North Korea, and she told him she wanted a one-on-one meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and asked Mr. Trump how could she make it happen given he had met the Korean leader, a North Korean leader, a few times. Now, in a statement, the two leaders affirmed the importance of strengthening the region's network of like-minded countries such as with South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and India, and to achieve a free and open Indo-Pacific.
All right, many thanks for that update. CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. And we'll be having more insights on the leaders' meeting later this hour when we speak with Tomohiko Taniguchi, a former special advisor to the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and special advisor at the Fujitsu Future Studies Center. Well, China, meantime, is warning of risks to global energy supplies, urging restraint as Gulf tensions threaten vital oil flows. It says all sides must keep supply lines open as Washington weighs easing sanctions on Iranian crude to curb prices. Now, the call comes as Israel and Iran trade fresh strikes.
中方一贯反对非法的单边制裁。我们对当前的中东局势持续紧张深感担忧，各方应当立即停止军事行动，避免局势进一步升级，防止地区局势动荡对全球经济发展造成更大的影响。能源安全对世界的经济至关重要，各方都有责任确保能源的供应稳定畅通。
Iran's Revolutionary Guards say their spokesperson has been killed in the latest attacks. State media reports Brigadier General Ali Mohammed Naini died in what the Guards call a cowardly attack by U.S. and Israeli forces. Now, Israel says it struck targets in Tehran, calling them regime-linked infrastructure. Iran responded with a missile barrage, triggering sirens in Tel Aviv. Tehran has escalated after the South Pass strike against energy infrastructure, warning of zero restraint if hit again, and says it's used only a fraction of its firepower. In recent days, Iranian strikes have hit key facilities across the Gulf, including refineries in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, the world's largest LNG hub. Well, that attack alone has knocked out a significant share of Qatar's gas export capacity, with repairs expected to take years. Well, the U.S. failing to win in the last week the support it wants from key allies to secure key shipping routes. Concerns in many quarters that the war on Iran violates international laws. CNA spoke to an expert on conflict resolution.
When rules don't work, this is not an argument against rules. It would be like saying that we don't need police just because there are a lot of thieves. Well, it's precisely because there are a lot of thieves that we need police, that we need courts, that we need laws. So, obviously, in some cases, some leaders decide to ignore these rules and to act in a different way. And I think this is the precise case over Iran.
Professor Francesco Mancini from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy on Asia Tonight at 8 p.m. Singapore-Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, Panama pushes back against a multi-billion-dollar legal battle over its canal ports, denying claims it failed to respond and vowing a strong defense. And as disruptions to oil and LNG flows widen, we ask an expert to know how the fallout is feeding into CPI in Asia and threatening to turn into a food inflation story. Hello again. Good to have your company this Friday evening. It is time now for a business update with Olivia Marzuki. And Liv, it seems like there is just no end in sight for the energy shock as we see more escalations in the Middle East. Tell us more.
That's right, Oteli. So damage. We're talking about critical oil and gas sites in Middle East, but it's trickling down and fanning the flames of prolonged disruption across key sectors, even here in Asia. So damage assessments from the Iran war have become a major factor moving the energy markets as attacks increasingly target vital energy infrastructure. So it's been a volatile trading for commodities as leaders of the U.S. and Israel move to ease concerns over the war. Brent crude still elevated. It has, though, come off its session high of 119 a barrel. It's now moving at about 110 a barrel. WTI cooling slightly after hitting over $100 earlier. And European gas prices soared to their highest in more than 3 years. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington may soon remove sanctions from Iranian oil stranded on tankers. That could free up around 140 million barrels. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told media that Israel is helping the U.S. open the Strait of Hormuz. Analysts say that recent attacks on critical oil and gas facilities could take years to repair. Fears of a temporary energy shortage are shifting to concerns over long-term disruption. South Korea says attacks on Qatar's energy facilities raise uncertainty, but downplayed the concerns about disruption to its LNG supply. Qatar, as we know, is the third biggest LNG source for South Korea. Israel attacked Iran's huge South Pars gas facilities on Wednesday. Iran retaliated by striking the Ras Laffan LNG facilities in Qatar. The hit could reduce Qatar's LNG exports by around 17% in 3 to 5 years. That is on top of disruption in several oil and gas refineries, oil fields, and ports in the region, which could hurt everyday consumers.
It's certainly not good seeing multi-billion-dollar production and refining and facilities and multi-billion and multi-year kind of repair types of situations in terms of the supply chain for oil. Those are not good things. For every several, couple dollars of additional oil and tens of cents in terms of gas cost at the pump per gallon, that's an effective tax.
Well, markets are reassessing the potential for deeper economic pain from the escalating war in the Middle East. And the focus is no longer limited to military headlines and the Strait of Hormuz closure. Here to give us more insights into the matter, we have Louise Liu. She's head of Asia economics at Oxford Economics. So, Louise, just straight into it, right? How quickly does this structural energy shock feed into Asia's inflation, and which central banks may now have to delay cuts or even tighten monetary policy?
Yes, hi, it's good to be on. I would say that for a lot of the economies in Asia, the pass-through to what consumers can see, so what we see every day, could be quite immediate, especially in places like Singapore, where you don't really have the buffer of extensive subsidies, or you don't have any significant price rigidity regimes in place. So there are a lot of economies that will feel the heat of this energy shock, I would say as early as this month, next month. And that, I think, will prompt several central banks around the region to at least, rethink their intention to ease policies, which was where we were coming into this crisis. We're expecting that, for instance, central banks in Philippines and India would actually increase interest rates just to really combat the inflationary pressures. Indonesia, on the other hand, might actually start to delay its rate cuts. We think MAS may also stay on the hawkish side, really, very attentive to inflationary pressures.
All right. So in other words, you're seeing big divergence across Asia, right? We're talking about North, Southeast, and South Asia. What's driving that gap the most?
Absolutely. Well, I think in a global energy crisis like this, there are really no winners. You might have relative winners. In North Asia, really, the vulnerability there lies in the fact that a lot of their industry processes are very energy intensive. That's also the case for Singapore in that regard. So, for instance, you think about tech manufacturing of Taiwan, Korea, Japan, those rely a lot on stable imported LNG supplies coming from Qatar. So that's a big source of vulnerability. For Southeast Asia, it's really about food prices, right? Higher commodity prices, higher agricultural prices. How is that going to impact your consumers, your households? They're going to feel the pinch of having to pay a lot more for their everyday groceries, for instance. And then in South Asia, in places like India, Sri Lanka, that's really the most fragile area that we see. We are really seeing significant, domestic fuel rationing, for instance, in some of these places. And I think that crunch, we're probably heading into, quite a pivotal few weeks there for these economies. So there are big divergences, but I would say all economies are somewhat vulnerable in their own ways.
Speaking of vulnerability, if the crisis drags on, I wonder which Asian currencies will be most at risk. And do you see a classic oil shock scenario? As we know, it leads to imported inflation, current account deficit, and eventually tighter financial condition.
Absolutely. So, I think, if this escalation persists and it seems, markets are really moving towards that expectation that this could last for at least another 2 or 3 months, then there are obvious weaknesses in several currencies. So the Indian rupee is one that we're watching out for. The Korean won is another, the Thai baht as well. All of those currencies are likely to be under a lot more pressure than the other currencies. I think there's a very classic risk-off pattern that's happening here. As you mentioned, weaker current account balances, imported inflation, capital outflows potentially if the dollar stays strong. So I think there are really this confluence of vulnerability for the region, and of course it's becoming a food inflation story as well. And I think for a lot of the economies, policymakers would be quite worried about things like social risk, right? The fact that protests could actually gain momentum because people are perhaps angry at the fact that food prices are just escalating. So I think there are a lot of risk here. But the lower income economies seem to be the ones that's really feeling the pinch here.
Okay, who are they when talking about lower income Asian economies most exposed to this combined hit from fuel, food, and shipping? And how close are they to breaking point?
Yeah, well, so India is a very when we look at some of these economies that are maybe most vulnerable, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Philippines, those are the economies that we are perhaps red flagging at this current moment. Typically, I would say that Asian governments do have very strong fiscal buffers to overcome some of these pressures. But after having, I would say, over-subsidized the 2022 energy shock, so we all recall the high prices in 2022, after over-subsidizing that, a lot of the balance sheets for some of these governments are actually still quite weak. So the capacity to actually impose more subsidies to support households is actually much weaker now. And I think that is really where, the fact that if this crisis does continue, that would really compound that cost of living pressure across some of these economies. And I think it doesn't help that a lot of these economies are also seeing weaker currencies. So to the extent that that adds to, how much they can actually buffer, or how much more they will have to pay because they're importing energy from other countries, then I think that really compounds the problem for some of these economies.
All right. We value your perspectives for today. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Louise Liu, Head of Asia Economics at Oxford Economics. When oil hits $100 a barrel, it doesn't just affect petrol prices. It raises inflation expectations, it changes interest rate outlooks, and it forces investors to rethink positioning. But is this a turning point for markets or just a temporary volatility? And as CNA's Money Mind team finds out, there could be an opportunity out there for investors in their 20s.
For investors in their 20s, volatility may be an opportunity. Time horizon is their greatest advantage.
If you're young, you should be completely unperturbed by this because you are investing for the long term. And if the market falls now, it's actually better for you as a young person because you get to buy them cheaper.
For young investors who have a long investment horizon, these are usually the investors that are able to tolerate short-term volatility the most.
History supports that. Markets recovered from the oil crises of the 1970s, from the global financial crisis, from COVID-19.
So the one thing that investors should not be doing right now is to panic sell your portfolios. Because firstly, it derails your long-term investment plans. And number two, if you sell your portfolios, you will miss out on any potential rebounds in the market.
Instead of reacting, Wei Ren recommends rebalancing.
Ensure that your portfolios do not drift in such a way that it is no longer aligned with your individual risk profile. Assuming you run a balanced portfolio, 50-50, 50 to equities and 50 to fixed income. And if during this crisis, the equity markets have sold off quite sharply to the extent that your equity allocation falls to maybe about towards 45, I think that is the time when you can consider, bringing back to the 50-50 target that you have set for your own portfolio.
$100 oil shifts the short-term outlook, but long-term returns are built on discipline, diversification, and time, not headlines.
Keep calm, assess, and then carry on.
You can catch Money Mind's full episode on oil shock strategy on YouTube, MeWatch, and CNA.Asia. And that's all I have in business news for you, Sally. Back to you.
All right. Well, thanks very much for that report. Olivia? A time now for another short break, but coming up in East Asia tonight, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi avoids a clash with Donald Trump over Iran during talks in Washington. The U.S. president steered into controversy by likening the U.S. surprise attack on Iran to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. More insights when we speak with Tomohiko Taniguchi, former special advisor to the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, right after this break. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China is urging restraint and unimpeded oil flows through the Persian Gulf as fresh Israel-Iran strikes raise fears over global energy supplies. Now, a slight pullback in oil on hopes that the conflict may end sooner than expected, but prices remain near record highs as the Strait of Hormuz stays effectively shut and Iran continues missile strikes across the Gulf. And walking a diplomatic tightrope in Washington, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi sidestepping President Trump's pressure over military support in the Middle East while reinforcing the U.S.-Japan alliance. And plenty more to unpack. So for more, let's bring in Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor for Fujitsu Future Studies Center and also former Special Advisor to the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us yet again this evening. Let's just kick things off with a big picture question where the broad verdict on this summit seems somewhat mixed. So I want to get your thoughts on this. I mean, if you had to give Takaichi's meeting with Trump a grade, what would it be? Where did she do well and where did she fall short?
It may not be A+, but certainly A. And overall, the results have been much, much better, more than mixed, much better than anticipated, because Donald Trump did not actually urge Japan to do something that Japan could not possibly do. And unlike the language that he used vis-a-vis some of the European leaders, he remained very much cordial, warm, even friendly to Ms. Takaichi.
Yeah, fortunately, there wasn't that Zelensky moment that some were anticipating. But there was that awkward moment in the room, though, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, which is Trump's Pearl Harbor reference. Takaichi, obviously, she appeared somewhat uncomfortable during the press conference. But in a situation like this, I mean, is there anything she could have realistically done to sort of maybe seem like she's regaining control of the situation?
Well, she could have said something like, I understand why Donald Trump had to do in such a way as he actually did. Unlike the war in 1991-92, when Jim Baker spent a lot of time pulling together a coalition after going through cumbersome UN processes, this attack should have been a surprise attack. And the Japanese reporter that made that question presupposed that the United States had a prior consultations with the alliance partners. This was impossible, to which President Trump had to respond predictably in a very much edgy sort of tone.
Or perhaps if she had said that, he would have given her an A+ for her grade. But I want to talk about how this summit is also more about beyond just the Middle East, right? It was also the bigger question of whether Washington, how focused can they stay on Asia? And what does this meeting tell you about America's long-term strategic attention to East Asia?
As spelled out, some of the important national security documents published late last year, Indo-Pacific region is pretty much a focal point for the United States. And I think the bilateral meeting actually gave assurance and reassurance to that pledge. And as regards the pledge, I think a lot of countries in the Indo-Pacific region took this bilateral meeting as a source of assurance for themselves as well.
I want to talk about flattery there, though. I mean, because that was, Takaichi's thing, right? The language that she chose, because I want to highlight one of the statements that Ms. Takaichi said. And she said that Donald is the only person who can bring peace and prosperity across the world. I mean, how should we read that in diplomatic terms? Is it going to carry a political cost by making Japan somewhat seem too eager to please?
Well, the best rapport that the Japanese Prime Minister could have with the United States is always a source of political power, diplomatic capital, with which Japan should work continuously in coming years and even decades. So, yes, for that purpose, I think Takaichi has used, understandably, a language of flattery.
And obviously, you're in a unique position to judge this next point I'm going to make, because you have worked closely with the late Shinzo Abe, who he himself invested heavily in personal diplomacy with Trump. So now, looking at Takaichi's approach, I mean, she's seen Trump in person twice now. Where do you see, in terms of continuity with the Abe playbook, or where do you see herself maybe writing a different script?
I think it's been to do with the fact that Takaichi has won a recent election is in quite a big way. Donald Trump mentioned how big the victory was, not even once, but multiple times. So Takaichi, being someone well endowed with political capital, has made a strong impression on President Trump. And that strong individual, Takaichi, is a reflection, seen from the U.S. President's perspective, of the close connection that Takaichi had with the late Prime Minister Abe. And yes, the fact that Takaichi's favored interpreter worked very much closely between these two individuals also helped.
And okay, well, highlighted obviously she won big in the elections. But, having said that, besides prices of rice and all that, if voters are starting to feel the pain, right, of higher oil prices, higher gas prices because of the Iran war, is that going to threaten Takaichi's so-called honeymoon phase, much faster than expected?
Well, that's a challenge to all political leaders across the region. Voters in Japan, in particular, had a great amount of concerns how the bilateral meeting would go, whether this would be, as you say, a Zelensky moment. And that sort of anxiety has been ameliorated. And I think it's a collective sigh of relief that I can hear from across the nation.
And at the heart of it, Japan went to Washington. I'm sure it's something that it needed to say. So, Professor Taniguchi, if there was one non-negotiable message Japan had to deliver at this summit, what would that be? And did Japan actually deliver it?
It's not been published, but I am sure this was so timed as for Takaichi to say in person to Donald Trump how Taiwan would remain important and how important the involvement of the United States in the region will continue to be. That is the most important message. And I think Takaichi did deliver that, even though Ministry of Foreign Affairs or State Department did not mention that.
And overall, a great A from Professor Taniguchi for this summit. Always valuable to get your perspective. Thank you once again for joining us, Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor for Fujitsu Future Studies Center. Now, in other news, the Philippine military has accused a Chinese Navy ship of, quote, alarming and provocative actions after one of its vessels was found to be targeted by a fire control radar during a patrol in the South China Sea earlier this month. Well, it says that the guided missile frigate was operating near Sabina's Shoal when the Chinese vessel approached and later locked its radar onto the ship. Fire control radar is used to track targets from missiles or gunfire. The military says the incident did not escalate, but warned that it raised the risk of miscalculation at sea. Sabina Shoal, which lies within Manila's exclusive economic zone, has been an area of maritime contention with Beijing. Chinese vessels have been accused of carrying out dangerous maneuvers in those waters, a claim that Beijing has repeatedly denied. Taiwan's defense minister says that China's unabated military buildup poses a pressing threat, and that's despite a recently released U.S. intelligence report assessing that Beijing does not have immediate plans to invade Taiwan, even as China raised its defense budget by 7%.
我们的相关的作为就是我们要不断的累积我们的防卫实力，然后来形成一个有效的贺阻，来让他这样的一个共产的计划，他感到有一个高的危险的，也就是说让他的这个成功的计算变得相当的低。
Minister Wellington Koo added that Taiwan's military will continue its monitoring of Chinese activities. The island has been stepping up its readiness drills as it continues to bolster defenses in anticipation of a potential attack by China. Beijing views the island as its own and says it will bring it under control by force if necessary. However, Taipei has repeatedly rejected China's claims. Now, the U.S. has charged 3 people for reportedly helping to smuggle billions of dollars worth of artificial intelligence chips to China. The alleged scheme violates American export controls introduced in 2022, which basically restricts the sale of high-performance AI chips to China. And the suspects are associated with U.S.-based server maker Supermicro Computer. The firm's co-founder, Yi Xianliao, was among the charged and has been placed on leave. The other 2 were a sales manager in the Taiwan office and a contractor. The trio allegedly routed U.S.-made servers through Taiwan to Southeast Asia, repackaged them and shipped them to China, hiding the activity from manufacturers and export authorities. Supermicro was informed of the indictment on Thursday. The California-based company said it's not a defendant, but is cooperating with investigators. While U.S. officials did not name which chips were involved in the alleged scheme, it may involve NVIDIA products. The tech giant said in a statement that strict compliance with export laws is a top priority. It did not say whether the company was aware of the alleged smuggling activity. China has placed the mayor of its Chongqing municipality under investigation in what the top anti-graft watchdog has called a serious violation of law and discipline. No further details have been given. In a statement announcing the probe against Hu Henghua, he was given a disciplinary warning within the Communist Party of China earlier in 2023 for failing to oversee safety regulations in the aftermath of a building collapse in Changsha, the capital city of Hunan. 50 people were killed in that incident. The probe comes amid an intensifying campaign to root out corruption in the ruling party, a drive that has seen several senior officials removed and arrested in recent years. Now, Chongqing is China's 4 province-level municipalities. Others include Beijing, Tianjin, and Shanghai. They hold the same administrative status as a province. 14 people are missing and more than 50 injured after a fire broke out at a car parts factory in Daejeon City in central South Korea. Yonhap News Agency reported that at least 24 people had serious injuries, with many having inhaled toxic gas and others jumping from the building to escape. A total of 170 workers were inside the plant when the blaze started in the afternoon. The severity prompted authorities to issue a national firefighting mobilization order, which happens when a fire is classified as beyond the firefighting capacity of local governments. More than 200 firefighters were deployed to the scene. Officials say one of the 2 buildings had been fully burnt down and the other remains burning. This makes rescue efforts a challenge due to concerns of a sudden collapse. President Lee Jae-myung has ordered for the activation of all available resources. Investigations on the cause of the fire are still ongoing. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has supervised a tactical drill showcasing a new type of battle tank. The state-run media KCNA says the exercise features advanced mobility and firepower, as well as protection against missiles and drones. It says the drill involved armored units firing anti-tank missiles, alongside simulations targeting enemy drones and helicopters to clear the way for infantry and tanks. Now, Mr. Kim was also seen trying out the new tank with his teenage daughter, Jue. She has been making frequent public appearances with her father in recent months, drawing growing attention to her possible future roles. Last month, South Korea's National Intelligence Service said that Jue has been designated as a successor to her father. The North Korean leader has pushed for the modernization of his country's military in recent years, including the development of long-range ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. A time now for a break, but coming up in East Asia tonight, Chinese circuit board manufacturer Delton makes strong debut on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And Seoul ramping up its security ahead of comeback concert by K-pop megastars BTS in the South Korean capital tomorrow. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and my colleague Olivia Marzuki decided to come back to the studio, give us more business news. And the question is, Liv, despite concerns over the war in the Middle East, there is no stopping AI enthusiasm, it seems, and Hong Kong apparently saw another strong listing from a tech firm today.
That's right, I'll tell you, a fresh crop of stocks linked to China's AI industry is really attracting strong investor interest. A blockbuster maiden trade for Chinese circuit board maker Delton Technology, with more than 106% stock surge at one point in Hong Kong. Shares briefly hit 148 Hong Kong dollars a piece, more than double its offer price, before paring those gains and closing at 96 Hong Kong dollars. It is far outperforming the typical first-day gain for similar listings of around 22%. And the surge marks the biggest jump for a Hong Kong listing this year, following the debut of generative AI startup Minimax back in January. This reflects investor appetite for tech and AI-linked themes. Delton raised more than $420 million in its IPO, and the company makes printed circuit boards used in servers, a critical component powering AI infrastructure. It is banking on rising demand for server components as well as the need for the hardware behind it. Panama's president has rejected claims that the government failed to respond to a major arbitration case over control of key Panama Canal ports. President Jose Raul Mulino says Panama has appointed international lawyers and will strongly defend itself against a lawsuit filed by Hong Kong-based Panama Ports Company. The firm, a unit of Hong Kong conglomerate CK Hutchison, is seeking at least $2 billion in damages after a Panama court struck down its contract earlier this year to operate 2 major ports along the canal. This after U.S. President Donald Trump alleged China has influence over the strategic waterway, claims that Panama has denied. Panama Ports Company had accused the government of ignoring arbitration proceedings, but Mr. Mulino dismissed as it's a lie, saying officials had only requested more time to prepare for the case. The legal battle adds to growing geopolitical pressure surrounding one of the world's most critical shipping routes. And a key Apple supplier says it will decouple its rare earth supply chain in China over the next 3 years, and that is amid a wave of companies seeking to insulate themselves from geopolitical rivalry. Murata makes multi-layer ceramic capacitors, which are used to regulate electricity flow in devices such as Apple iPhone and also used in data centers. The Japanese firm alone supplies 40% of global demand. Trade between China and Japan has soured in recent months following Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's comments on Taiwan. Beijing has imposed export curbs on critical minerals, as well as several top Japanese firms in response to those comments. China is one of Murata's largest source of revenue, but the company is diversifying to other Asian markets. Its customers, which include Nintendo and Sony, shift their production away from China. And that's all I have in Business World Today. Happy Friday, Oteli.
Now, BTS is back with a bang. The global K-pop phenomenon released its latest album, Arirang, today, marking its first full group comeback in nearly 4 years. Now, the return comes after all 7 members completed mandatory military service and is drawing massive global attention. Within the first hour of release, the music video for the lead single, titled Swim, racked up more than 1 million views. Beyond the music, tomorrow's comeback concert in Seoul is expected to draw hundreds of thousands of fans and could deliver a major boost to the South Korean economy. So for the very latest, we have CNA's Grace Shin here with us in the studio to tell us more about this comeback concert. We're expecting it to be on a very big scale, but just how big is it going to be?
Well, we know it's very big from the location they've chosen to hold it. It's going to be staging a very large scale and very rare K-pop concert at Gwanghwamun Plaza. And this isn't just any regular K-pop venue. It's a space tied to both Korea's royal history and its modern political life. So that already tells you that this is more than just a concert. And even the way they designed it reflects that BTS is planning to start inside the Gyeongbokgung Palace, moving through what's known as Path of the King, and then open out into the main stage. So it's literally a Path of the King for the kings of K-pop. And that's how Seoul's mayor described BTS. Also, President Lee Jae-myung framed BTS's comeback concert as a moment to showcase Korean culture globally. So the fact that the government has shown its willingness to make the heart of the capital become a part of BTS's comeback show demonstrates the large scale. And when you look at the business side, the scale gets even bigger. BTS isn't just a band. It's a key economic driver, especially to the entirety history of the K-pop industry. They're coming back with a full plan, whether it be a new album, a free concert, and a global tour that spans with over 82 shows across 34 cities. And Billboard estimates that they could generate up to $1 billion this year, which isn't a far-fetched goal given back in 2019 when their last global tour was held. They generated around $246 million, and that was already a record for a K-pop act. So even this free concert tomorrow, analysts believe that it could generate close to $180 million in Seoul alone. That's actually higher than some of the concerts that Taylor Swift has held globally. So you can see that this isn't about music. When we're talking about scale, the ripple effect will be across tourism, retail, transport, culture, everything.
Yeah, that's very impressive that, they are beating out the likes of Taylor Swift. And obviously, I would imagine a lot of preparation, a lot hangs on this comeback concert, right? We're already seeing the sort of impact we have on the ground. But in Seoul, paint us a picture. What does it look like now?
Well, speaking of painting a picture, Seoul is effectively turning purple, and that's the signature color of BTS and their fandom ARMY. And we're seeing that reflected in numbers, too. Foreign arrivals in South Korea in early March have jumped to just over 1.09 million, which is a 32.7% increase on year. And beyond the data, you can see it on the ground because you see so many foreigners flying in from different parts of the world just to see BTS. And I spoke to a fan from Singapore who flew all the way to South Korea for this concert. And I asked her whether it was a difficult decision for her, given not only the expenses, but the time you have to take away from work. Before we move on, let's hear what she had to say to us.
It's actually a really easy decision. It's not a hard decision at all. So I usually budget a lot purely for BTS. All my friends from all over the world, a lot of people flew down for this. I have friends from America, from Thailand, from Indonesia, and we're all here just celebrating together. Yeah, it's been super exciting. I'm going to go to Gwanghwamun later just to check out the stage.
So Michelle has been a 6-year ARMY now. She's been to South Korea many times. But she was speaking to me at one of the album's promotional events in Seoul, and she said what stood out for this concert was not only the fact that all 7 members are here together, so fans are very happy to see all the members together, but the fact that Seoul City is preparing in such a large scale. Because it's such a huge logistical operation, though, authorities have been expecting up to 260,000 people to come to Gwanghwamun Square. That's why there's been a national-level fire mobilization order where hundreds of personnel and equipment will be deployed tomorrow. The area is being split into zones for better crowd management. And you have to remember that South Korea faced a tragedy in 2022, the Itaewon crowd crush. So that's why this is a particularly sensitive issue, and authorities are on very high alert. That's why they also raised its terror level alert to the second highest in its 4-level tier. But it also means that there could be disruption, whether subway stations may stop, buses taking different routes. But authorities are really trying their best to not only make this safe, but a good experience for everyone, not just ARMY, too. There's incidents where people are holding a wedding on the same day. So attendees will be actually being able to be helped by the police go due to the road closures. So a lot of collaboration is on from different fronts. So you can see that BTS's comeback concert, yes, it's a concert, but at this scale, it's really the entire city of Seoul being turned into a live stage for the return of the Kings of K-pop.
I know, it is very exciting, and obviously safety always comes first. Yes. And we will be looking out for the concert tomorrow. Well, thanks so much, Grace. Always good to have you in our studio. Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I hope you've enjoyed this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.